Hello, everybody, and welcome back to what has become a bit of an annual tradition around these parts. It is my end-of-season post-mortem for the Boston Bruins and their 2023-2024 season. Easy for me to say now that it's come to a close. This will be a little bit depressing, but hey, at least the Celtics are in the Eastern Conference Final. PWHL Boston's playing for the Walter Cup. There's still a lot going on, and admittedly, it's not entirely negative to see the Bruins get knocked out, at least when juxtaposed to last season, the best regular season team of all time to fall to the 8th seed after a 3-1 lead and all of that nightmare. But that nightmare ties directly, of course, to the series that we just saw. Not only, of course, of the Bruins losing to the Florida Panthers again, this time in 6 games, not only had the Panthers won all 3 games on the road in Boston in this series, they did it last year as well. The Panthers have now won 6 straight games on TD Garden ice against the Bruins in the playoffs, which is just marvelous. I want to say this first and foremost about the Panthers, because obviously this is going to be very Bruins heavy. But in regards to the Panthers, they're a hell of a team, and that's that. They're going back to the Eastern Conference Final for a reason. They could very well go back to the Stanley Cup Final. They could very well win the damn thing this year, right? Like, they are an awesome, awesome team that I, at times, don't understand how they do as well as they do. Sergei Bobrovsky especially. Like, you can look at his numbers against Tampa, and then you look at his numbers against Boston, and it's like he just has his sights set on, I am not losing to the Boston Bruins, and he doesn't. So there's that. But yeah, the way in which the Bruins lost was heartbreaking, because there was a pathway to seeing them win this series. A good portion of that comes back to Game 4, and for what is for my money, still the worst officiating call or no call that there has been in the playoffs, that being the Sam Bennett goal that tied Game 4 at 2-2. There have been plenty, oh my God, plenty of bad calls, no calls. I mean, God, Vancouver and Edmonton has had plenty of examples. Colorado, Dallas, even though Dallas ended up winning Game 6 in double overtime, they should have won it sooner than that. There's been a lot. It's not a matter of the Bruins being exclusively screwed over, right? Of course not. It's just officiating, the DOPS. It all fucking sucks and takes away, oftentimes, from the enjoyment of what should be the most entertaining sport in the world, and at times can be when the NHL doesn't trip over their own 2 fucking feet. That said, the Panthers should have won this series, right? And they did. And we go back to the start of the year for the Bruins, and I feel like that's kind of what you have to look at and to see why it's not as disappointing. Side note, by the way, I'm very much looking forward to Florida and the New York Rangers trying to murder one another for 4 to 7 games. That's going to be fun. But when it comes to the Bruins, heading into this season, and this is kind of encapsulated by their lineup that they finished with the season with on Daily Faceoff. Heading into the season, a lot of people expected, with the departures of Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, that this lineup might not even make the playoffs. And I don't feel as though that was an incorrect take. You still had Toronto looking as strong as they've arguably ever looked. Tampa was still viewed as a team that should still make the playoffs. Who knows how far they go. But there was so much optimism surrounding essentially every team in the Atlantic Division this year, especially when it comes to Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa. All 3 of those teams were viewed as very legitimate shots at making the playoffs. So a lot of people didn't even have the Bruins making the postseason this year. And again, when you look at the lineup that they just finished the season with, yeah, it sounds about right that this team wouldn't make the playoffs. Now, granted, the lines have, shifted a bit throughout the year, but what do you mean your centers are Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, and like your big free agent signing, Morgan Geekie? And we'll get to what that says. And I mean, screw it, we can say it now. They were very clearly missing a number 1 center. Very, very clearly. And not too many teams can get away with not having a number 1 center. You can make some arguments over, some teams that have maybe gone far with St. Louis in 2019, Ryan O'Reilly. Is he your prototypical number one center? No, you probably want him more as a 2C and a complementary piece to somebody else, but it very much worked for them. Pavel Zacha, Charlie Coyle, Morgan Geekie, they are not Ryan O'Reilly. Ryan O'Reilly is a bona fide top six center, for example. Again, only using him as an example. Whereas there's an argument that Charlie Coyle, Pavel Zacha are more 2-3s as opposed to especially 1-2s. And that came back to haunt them. You know, heading into the playoffs, I picked the Leafs to win in the first round, as a lot of people did. And granted, well, I think it's going to work out great for the Leafs that they lost in round one, because I think Craig Berube is a great hire. I still am rubbed the wrong way by that guy because of 2019, and not just because the Bruins lost that series, but, you know, it is what it is. I think he will have perfect synergy with Brad Treliving and the type of team that they want to build. But ultimately, the Bruins did beat the Leafs in Game 7 after nearly fucking blowing it, as the Bruins are off to do. A lot of people are like, oh no, the Leafs, they choke all the time. There is a difference between underperforming and choking, right? The Leafs have underperformed. They have not accomplished what they should have accomplished at this point. They have had examples of choking, having leads and blowing it away and stuff like that. The Bruins, as I put out a video last year about, they are the NHL's premier chokers. It's outside of 2011, and if it wasn't for 2011, a lot more people would realize that. One championship can make opinions change for a lifetime. But you can look, 2013 against Chicago, Game 6 in the finals, 17 seconds, all of a sudden, there goes Game 7, and you've lost the series. 2019, St. Louis Stanley Cup final. They fucking choked. They didn't show up in Game 7. The reverse sweep at the hands of the Philadelphia Flyers. And throughout that video, I go through the 70s, through the 80s, through the 90s, and talking about teams that they lost to in the playoffs, sometimes via sweeps, that they had 20, 30 more points than in the regular season. The Bruins are premier chokers. Last year, great example, losing to Florida. This year, though, a lot of people, like I said, were not picking this team to make the playoffs. And I don't think they were necessarily wrong to do that, just like they weren't wrong to pick the Leafs to win. And I said it myself, like, man, there were times in that Bruins-Leafs series where whoever advances is just going to get punked by Florida. The Bruins didn't get punked by Florida. The Florida Panthers were outright the better team, that's for sure. But they put up a fight, at least, at times. More on that in a second. But again, you look at this lineup and it's just like, what the hell were you even doing in the second round? You look at the strength of teams that have been eliminated. The Carolina Hurricanes, on paper, wipe the floor with this Bruins forward core. The Colorado Avalanche, who were just eliminated tonight as well, wipe the floor with this lineup. Whether or not it's Edmonton or Vancouver, you see my point here, right? It's just one of those things where this team didn't necessarily belong, and they went from arguably the greatest underachievers of all time, best regular season last year and choking in the first round, to putting forth a pretty good performance as overachievers. I think making the playoffs was an overachievement. I think beating the Leafs was an overachievement. And taking the Florida Panthers to 6 when that series could have easily gone 7. You know, I can't be that upset about this season. Like, obviously, I'm disappointed to see my favorite team eliminated. But again, you look at just the forwards and you're like, man, what's going on here? And we'll get into some of the stats in a minute. But again, you look at this lineup and it's like, you start the season with Lucic, he's gone, so you try to replace him with Pat Maroon at the trade deadline. Justin Brazeau goes from the ECHL to the AHL, which is, and then up to the NHL, which is insane. And then defensively, Mason Lohrei was one of the stories of this postseason for the Bruins, and he had a very strong start to this Panthers series, and all of a sudden now, you know, that top 4 that you see there is pretty much locked in, and it's just kind of a question of what will that bottom 6 look like, especially when, as we'll get into with the cap situation, Grzelcyk and Forbort probably gone. And then, of course, the goaltending, that's where a lot of the disappointment comes from, because Jeremy Swayman, I mean, he's just phenomenal. He is absolutely phenomenal. And as we get into, we'll avoid cap friendly for the moment, Obviously, I'll try to refresh this now. Not fully up to date still on Hockey Reference. They'll only have the first 5 games. Obviously, Game 6 won't be included here, but we'll kind of know where the points come from. If you look at the Bruins scoring, Jake DeBrusk point per game through the first 5 games of the series, he was the Bruins' best player. And it's really, really weird because in the regular season, he is, let's go with inconsistent at times, right? Like his career high, 50 points 2 years ago, or last year now, I should say. 2 years ago, basically. And how much money is he going to look to get in free agency? You're talking to him being a $5-6 million player. That's a little bit scary. But he is a playoff performer, typically. So that's a really weird situation. There will be a lot of focus on David Pastrnak only having 1 goal. Whether or not there's an injury there, who knows? But my biggest takeaway from that, and it is intertwined, if I can remember what tab is what. Oh, that's right, I closed the Daily Faceoff tab. But David Pastrnak is often not a facilitator. He scores. That's what he does. He cannot always generate those chances himself. And no offense to Morgan Geekie, who, 2 points in 5 games of 2 goals. Morgan Geekie's not that guy that's going to be able to set up David Pastrnak all the time. Charlie Coyle is not that guy. Pavel Zacha was not that guy, even though he finally scored his first goal ever in the playoffs in Game 6. That's honestly my biggest takeaway, is that the Boston Bruins are missing what is almost impossible to get. It does not happen often that a true number 1 center becomes available. But again, as you look at these lines, it's not Charlie Coyle, it's not Morgan Geekie, it's not Pavel Zacha that is going to be able to unlock what David Pastrnak can provide to your team. And I was talking about it with people on stream last night, and it raises the question of like, well, how often do number 1 centers even get traded? The answer is very, very rarely. Dating back over the last 20 years, just about now, since Joe Thornton was traded to the Sharks, there's a couple. You could argue Mike Richards, when he was traded to LA from Philly, was the number 1 center. Jack Eichel, but even then, those circumstances were weird because of injuries. There's a handful or less, or fewer, of examples of a number 1 center being traded. You typically get them through the drafts, and it puts the Bruins into that situation now where I'm just like, I don't really know how they go up from here, right? Because Martin Necas, I'm sorry, from what we know right now, that guy's not a number 1 center. I know Elias Lindholm is doing well in the playoffs for the Canucks. Man, if Elias Lindholm is like, that's the guy that's going to help us win, I don't know. And you can't really blame me for being nervous about that because, well, okay, you're telling me he's another Jake DeBrusk, like he'll show up in the playoffs? Like, you better really fucking show up in the playoffs, especially, as I mentioned, when the Atlantic is getting better. It's going to be more difficult to make the playoffs, and you can't really afford to have your number 1 center not be good in the regular season. So there's just so much with this team in terms of where things are going. Obviously, the Brad Marchand injury and him missing 2 games certainly didn't help, but I just feel like there's a lot of bigger problems here. Beyond just the fact that, they lost a series in 6 games where, couple of tight games, the last 3 games all finished with a 1-goal differential after the craziness of the first 2 games. But it's just one of those things where it's like, you look at a team like the Florida Panthers, you look at a team even like Carolina that wasn't good enough to make it through to the conference final this time, but then you look at what the Rangers have, what the Stars have, and all of that, and I don't really see how the Bruins get what they need. And, you can look here, Jamie Swayman with a .915 save percentage by the end of it is not indicative of how he played. You could call the last goal a bit soft or fluky, whatever the hell you want to call it. But you had the goaltending. I just don't know if they had the rest of the personnel. And again, when talking about the Bruins here and what's coming up for them in a year where they do not have a draft pick until the 4th round. RFA Jesper Boqvist, I mean, he's guy. He's 12th forward, maybe 13th, 14th. Like, he is what he is at this point. They have to re-sign DeBrusk, or maybe they won't. Heinen, Maroon, Megna, JVR, like, you know, outside of Megna, who didn't play in the playoffs, but, you know, 3 out of the bottom 4 there, you have your moments, but they're not making or breaking this team moving forward. But they do have cap space, thankfully, opening up because Forbert, Grzelcyk, and Shattenkirk's deals are up. And again, Lohrei is probably good to go. Andrew Peak's going to be here. I mean, 2.75 for the next 2 years is a little bit rich. But that defense is basically that defense. I mean, it's already signed through next year, unless someone becomes available or they pull something off. So the biggest thing that they're missing, like I said, when you look at that team, is a top center. I don't know how they get it done because they have one of the most barren prospect pools because they have been consistently pushing to win. And in my mind, they are where Pittsburgh is heading. You know, Pittsburgh is, and you could argue, and there are some differences, but Pittsburgh has been at the point where they're just like, let's keep pushing, let's keep pushing. The only difference is for the Bruins, it was let's keep pushing. Oh shit, this is working. Oh, now Bergeron and Krejci are gone. And it's so difficult to try and make up for that. And again, in terms of players to trade away, picks to trade away, it's not really there. Like the best asset that they have is Linus Ullmark. Here's the issue. 15-team no trade clause. Apparently this year at the deadline, he declined to trade to Los Angeles. We still don't know who the hell that return would have been for. God forbid if it was like PLD, although who knows, maybe he'd work out as a Bruin. But even if it's him, even if it's Philip Deneau, are one of those two guys the ones to push that Bruins team to like, okay, you are just as much of a cup contender as Dallas, as the New York Rangers. Man, I don't know. And for any team that would be looking for a Linus Ullmark, do they really have the spare player to offer that the Bruins need, which again is a legitimate number 1 center? If you're going after a goalie like Linus Ullmark, it's because you think you're a contender and he's the guy that can backstop you and make the saves to push you over the edge. The Edmonton Oilers, for God's sakes. I mean, granted, Calvin Pickard's played pretty well, but the Oilers, I think, would kill to have a Linus Ullmark right now. The problem is, I mean, obviously Connor McDavid's not available. Leon Draisaitl's not going to be available. And I got to be honest, I don't really think someone like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is the missing piece. I don't view him as like, yep, there's your number 1 center on a Stanley Cup team. So I don't know what the hell the Bruins do moving forward. I can be happy about this past season because, again, I think they overperformed based especially off of, I mean, just look at this fucking roster, right? The problem is I just don't see how they maneuver the pieces to be able to take that next step, to be able to beat Florida, to win on home ice against Florida in the playoffs. I don't currently see it. You know, even if you have $21 million in cap space to work with, you have to pay Swayman. That was always the plan. It's going to work out according to plan, which is great. Ullmark, does he stay? Does he go? And then again, you talk about free agents like Steven Stamkos. Like, again, he's not exactly the guy anymore. He's still great. He's a future Hall of Famer. But is he the guy to push him over the edge? Like I said, I feel like you have to go to the draft to get that particular guy. The San Jose Sharks are about to get theirs. Chicago got theirs last year. It just makes me think that last season, 65 wins, that was the last hurrah. This season was the final sputters before the engine just says, I'm done, and stops. I don't think it'll be a full rebuild because I don't think with Jeremy Swayman, Charlie McAvoy, and David Pastrnak signed to what they are, I don't think you can afford to go full San Jose-esque rebuild. But at the same time, you need to, because rebuilding on the fly, is that going to get you the players that you need to surround that core with? Those 3 that I just mentioned, are you going to be able to get that insulation if you're selecting 8th overall, 10th overall, 14th? I don't know. It's very much a time of uncertainty right now. I think for a lot of Bruins fans, I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, you know, second round, beat the Leafs. a lot of people are happy with the season and not totally devastated because it's better than what a lot of people thought it would be. But you start looking towards the future, and from my viewpoint, it doesn't look very pretty. And does that come down to Don Sweeney as the general manager? You know, he and Cam Neely, Cam as the president of the team. Have they overstayed their welcome? I mean, maybe not. Did you miss out on your chances? Maybe not. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not holding my breath expecting any changes there. There have been times where I've wanted to see Don Sweeney go. There have been times where I thought he's done very well. If he can spin this into a cup winner in the next 3 years or so, then holy hell, put him in the Hall of Fame. I don't know, man. I just don't see it. And then the final piece of the puzzle, right, that we're talking about here is Jim Montgomery. And I wanted to save him for last because there was a lot of conversation about, man, did the Bruins fire Jim Montgomery if they lose to the Leafs? And that conversation's still there a little bit after losing to the Panthers. But it's very difficult to say whether or not Jim Montgomery is the right or wrong coach for this team. Last year, round one against the Panthers, he got it wrong. He got totally outcoached by Paul Maurice. He got it wrong with what goalie he was throwing out there and when, trying to stick with Linus Ullmark when Ullmark wasn't 100%. And by the time you throw Jeremy Swayman in there, the Panthers already had the momentum and they were smelling the blood in the water. That's just what it is. Granted, they're not the Sharks. They're the Panthers. I just cannot help but look at this series and say, you were kind of outcoached again, because as you likely know by these score lines, the Bruins started off the series hot. Like they had just played 2 nights before against Toronto. Florida hadn't played in the week. They did well. And then they got smacked 2 games in a row. And amongst those games, you know, you look at game 2, and I'm pretty sure, did I skip right past it in terms of the total shots? Maybe I did. But a common theme throughout these games were the lack of shots by the Bruins. 15 shots in total in game number 2. Game 3 wasn't that much better. That's 33 for the Florida Panthers, 17 for the Bruins in game number 3. The defense of this was often, they were doing a quality over quantity approach. That was clearly the wrong approach. Clearly. I mean, the results speak for themselves. You were outscored 12-3 over games 2 and 3. And then again, the series became very close after that. I think in some ways, Jim Montgomery got it wrong again. And then the other big factor to this is the absurd fact that the Boston Bruins set the record for the most too many men penalties in a postseason in 13 games with 7. Took 13 games to break a record like that. Now, when it comes to too many men penalties and line changes and all that, who do you want to blame? Do you want to blame the coach? Do you want to blame the team? Who the hell do you want to blame? At the end of the day, I feel like the majority of the blame has to be on the coach. 7 times, man. 7 times. Puts you behind the 8 ball that much more. I like Jim Montgomery as a coach. I don't necessarily want to see him get fired, but, and granted, not all the too many men penalties came against Florida, but I just feel like Paul Maurice has his fucking number. And it's tough, right? Because I think with the Leafs, you know, you looked at like Sheldon Keefe and it's like, okay, how many times can we watch this guy get outcoached, right? And it felt that way a lot, maybe outside of when they beat Tampa in the first round last year. I feel like just Jim Montgomery has a kryptonite. I feel like he is a really good head coach. You know, they have that defense first style, strong goaltending to be the backbone of the team. But then you also look at the team construction and it's like, you know, how much more are you supposed to do with the team that you have? But then why are you trying to go for quality over quantity when your 3 centers are Coyle, Geeky, and Zacha? Where's the quality going to come from? No disrespect to those 3 NHLers for a reason, but at the same time, 5 goals between the 3 of you, you know? Like, where's the quality coming from? So it's just a really weird time where, like, first and foremost, again, the Florida Panthers just a really good team, so it softens the blow a bit. The NHL has been a fucking gong show in terms of like I said, officiating and the DOPS. I mean, Jesus, I didn't even mention the Elias Pettersson charging call, which by definition was a charge because he jumped. That's in the rule books. When the hell do you ever see referees call that a charge, though, when somebody jumps into somebody else? Never. God, Jacob Trouba would get charged or sent to the box with attempted charging 6 times a game. I am at peace with the idea that the Bruins are out of the playoffs because now I can just watch as a casual fan. And it doesn't really affect me too much. I mean, outside of just like being embarrassed for the NHL when their officials fuck shit up and the DOPS does nothing. I just can't help but look at this team, like I said, and think about the future. It doesn't look overly bright. I hope to be proven wrong. I really do. But that team right there, that is not a true Stanley Cup contender. That is a team that can win a round in the playoffs, can be competitive to maybe win a second one. But man, would I have had any confidence against the Rangers? Not really. You know, especially with, you know, the way the Rangers have been able to, you know, put up points this postseason, especially like Chris Kreider doing what he's done. I don't know, man. I don't know. I think it's finally going to happen for people that have been waiting for it. You get a brief glimpse of it in the mid-2010s, the 2 years or so the Bruins missed the playoffs, ended up with David Pastrnak in that time. You got that brief glimpse into, hey, the Bruins might be bad for the first time since the 2005 lockout ended. I think you're about to get that again. And that makes me incredibly spoiled. And all Bruins fans incredibly spoiled. Like, this has been an uber competitive team. Essentially, one season out since they traded Joe Thornton, because within a short amount of time, you end up with Zdeno Chara and company. You get Bergeron developing further. And outside of 2 years or so, they have been incredibly competitive in that time. Been to 3 Stanley Cup finals, won one of them. I can't complain too much if this is the team finally starting to really go down towards that, 8-7 seed at best range, which I think is likely. Depending on what they do this offseason, I wouldn't be surprised if they miss the playoffs next year, right? Again, because you're still going to be talking about the hope from Sens fans, Red Wings fans, Sabres fans. Although, maybe Sens fans and Sabres fans are just like, look, I don't even want to get my hopes up anymore, and no one would blame you for that. I think people are finally going to get what they want. And I've talked about that before in terms of like spoiled Boston sports fandom. Absolutely. Again, Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics have won a title in my history as a human being. It's just a waste of potential. That's what it is. But I'm all right with it. I accept it. But man, they really went with this playoff roster, didn't they? They really went with this playoff roster, and then they really took the approach of quality over quantity chances. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Didn't work out, though. With that, I think I have poured my soul out enough for this season. Like I said, I'll very much be paying attention to Rangers and Panthers. I think that's going to be a bloodbath. And then the Dallas Stars awaiting Vancouver or Edmonton. No matter who advances between Vancouver or Edmonton, I think they're going to be viewed as the underdogs. I said that I very much did not view Vancouver as a legitimate contender, especially even after the first round where, they had some trouble with Nashville. If they get past Edmonton, now Edmonton's kind of fraudulent in and of themselves, but if they get past Edmonton and you're starting to think like, man, they might be able to do this, God forbid the Canucks make it past Dallas, man. I mean, hey, we could be in store for a rematch in 94. Could happen. I'm excited to see how it plays out. I mean, we're now guaranteed, if I'm not mistaken, a cup winner that has not won in at least 25 years, I think was the number. Dallas obviously being the most recent cup winner in 99. Sorry, Sabres fans. But yeah, overall, everybody, thank you for making it this far. If you have, if you want to hear me talk hockey on a more regular basis, one, let me know because I like doing this. But also, we still have the Tukey's Take podcast where I'm joined every week by Sitting for the Win Productions right here on YouTube and our buddy Endo The voice is giving out. Have I mentioned the COVID and the bronchitis this year taking its toll? Hopefully I have. We'll have some more video stuff coming out soon. There's always the second channel as well for everything non-NHL franchise mode related and stuff like that. TWOGIE24. I think that's everything. Streaming nightly on twitch.tv/Tuggy24. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. And rest in peace to the Boston Bruins.